Welcome to Easy Eats with Chef Yves. I'm Chef Yves Dechaine, and welcome to the Learning Kitchen at the Greener Village. And today I'm here with pastry chef Simon Duvall of Simon's Kitchen and Bakery. Today he's going to be making his citywide, or his famous cinnamon buns. Let's get started on making these lovely buns.
Okay, yeah, cinnamon buns, they're pretty straightforward and not necessarily by design, but it just so happened that these are vegan cinnamon buns as well, meaning that there's no animal products in them whatsoever. There's no egg, there's no milk, there's no cream. So it's just your basic ingredients: yeast, water, sugar, flour, salt, cinnamon, and brown sugar.
Fantastic.
So what we do when we start the cinnamon buns is, first thing we got to do is make the bread. We have to make the dough.
Okay.
So in order to do that, this is a yeast dough. So what first thing we do is we activate our yeast. So if you see here, it's getting a little frothy, a little milky. What we've done is we've given the yeast food, water, and heat, and that's what we're doing. So hot water, sugar, and our yeast.
Perfect. So that's what we call a bloom, correct?
Okay.
Right on. So it blooms up, and what's the food that you put in there? You said sugar?
Yeah, it's just sugar. That's the fuel, basically, that the yeast needs to live and to activate and to grow. So what we do is we'll let that sit for a few minutes, and once the activation comes full, then we'll mix it in with the rest of our ingredients. So while we're waiting on that, we make sure that we get all of our ingredients ready. Here's our flour, our oil, and our salt. And we'll mix all that together in a mixer, and we'll just let it go for a few minutes, and that'll be it.
While we're getting that mixed up and stuff like that,
Sure.
Tell me a little bit about the shop. What do you guys do? What do you guys offer? Where are you located in New Maryland?
All right, well, we are at 429 New Maryland Highway. It's right on the main highway. We've been there since September of 2020. We opened to the public September 4th, Labor Day weekend. So this Labor Day weekend will be 2 years for us. What we offer is a fully equipped bake shop. So everything from what we're doing here, the cinnamon buns, pastries, cookies. We do custom cakes. We have a lot of vegan, not a lot, but we do some gluten-free items. Aside from that, we also have a fully stocked kitchen and dining room. So we do breakfast and lunch 5 days a week from Tuesday to Saturday.
You guys do more than just that as well. You guys have a kind of a to-go option, right? Like a meal kind of planning
Right.
thing?
So every week we run our individual meal plan program. So you have your 5 standard classic items, and then we have the 5 vegan varieties that go along with those options. All the meals are nutritionally balanced, so you get anywhere from 4 to 6 ounces of protein, you get a half a cup of starch, and you get a full cup of veg. And the menu changes every week, so you're never going to get bored, and you can have something new every day of the week for a month without duplicating.
Oh, that's fantastic. So for busy families, for busy individuals, it's a great way to eat healthy and portion
Yes.
control.
There's no time involved other than pickup. We do deliver if need be, but otherwise, there you go. You've got your meals ready to go.
Looks like we've got a nice foam on that bloom right now. So let's mix the dough and go from there.
Okay.
So I noticed, Simon, that when we were getting the prep ready, or the mise en place ready, that you were using a scale. You weren't using measuring cups. Now, let's talk a little bit on that. I mean, there's some bakers that if you're doing quick and simple, but tell me why it's always important or more beneficial to use a scale when baking than it is to just use a cup or a teaspoon.
So for me personally, the way I operate is I do it by weight versus volume. I make a lot of big batches, and if I'm making a recipe that calls for 32 cups of flour, I'm not going to be scooping out 32 cups of flour. Plus, when you're doing it by weight, that is way more specific, and it's much more accurate doing it that way. Also, because if you're switching between liquids and solids, the volume of a 1 cup is going to be a lot different in weight for 1 cup of brown sugar than it's going to be for 1 cup of white sugar. So the 1 cup of each might be the same in that sense, but the grams are going to be completely different. So that way you get a much more accurate and a much more stable and consistent end product with your recipe.
And that's why they say that baking is more of a science than a feel, but and I completely agree. So that's wonderful. So basically, when you put things together, I've always wondered, do you put your dry into your wet or your wet into your dry?
So always add dry to wet. So what I'm doing here is I'm just adding the oil to the yeast activation. So always put all your wets together, and then you want to add your dry to your wets. We teach a junior chef class once a month at the bakery for kids 5 to 15, and one of the big skills I always impress upon them is that dry to wet. So the reason we do that is if you add all of your wet to this dry and you mix it up, it might look perfectly mixed and great, but then you'll have that puck of just dry flour at the bottom, and then that's no good for anybody. So when you add your dry to your wet, you know that if it drops to the bottom, you're gonna have all that moisture underneath it, and you have a much better chance of not missing any clumps of flour, clumps of baking soda in any of your recipes.
And I find as well is sometimes if you have too much flour, because again, it's a science and we're talking about atmospheric pressure, we're talking about it's humid today. So we may need a little bit less flour than we would actually need. So it's a matter of adding till you get the consistency you're looking for as well.
That's a very good point. In the kitchen, our kitchen anyway, like it can fluctuate anywhere from 19 degrees to 30 degrees depending on the day and depending on what's going on outside. So I may make this recipe 100 times and 98 of them perfect, no problem. But there'll be 2 times where it just fails. And there's you can't really know the reason why, but there's so many outside factors that are going in it. The one that you mentioned with too much flour, that's a perfect example. For our biscuits per se, I always add 80% of my flour into the recipe, and then I use the rest as dusting flour. So I know that I'm supposed to incorporate the majority of that flour into it, but if I don't need it, I don't need it, so I don't use it. But for this recipe, with the cinnamon buns, we generally need all of this flour.
Oh, okay, perfect. So yeah, again, a mix of science and technique to be a baker.
Baking is chemistry for hungry people.
Welcome back to Easy Eats with pastry chef Simon Duvall from Simon's Kitchen and Bakery out in New Maryland. And we're going to continue on making the dough for your wonderful, world-famous cinnamon rolls.
Yes, sir, we are. So our yeast is fully bloomed. We've got all of our liquids into this bowl here. So we are going to slowly, so we don't make a mess, we're going to add all of our wets to the bowl first. And we have our flour and our salt already mixed in here.
Now again, I want to get back to the old yeast and stuff like that. How important is it to let it bloom fully? Now, can you do it quickly? What's the if you don't let it bloom long enough? I guess is my question is, will you mess up your cinnamon rolls?
There are 13 stages to a full bread production.
Oh, I remember those stages.
And 3 of them are letting it rest, letting it bloom, letting it grow and double in size. The way I describe that is like shifting gears.
Okay.
Okay. So when you do your initial activation, that is essentially going from first to second gear. If you try to rush it, then it'll still work, but it'll take you a little bit longer to get to the end result.
Gotcha. Okay.
So, but again, you don't want to go too long, otherwise the gases that are building up, basically, the engine that drives the bread production, you're going to lose all of that, and you're not going to end up with fully risen and fully formed bread.
Because the gas will be out. Like I usually tell my students is that you treat the yeast like a little animal, and you're giving it food. So when its belly gets full, when people's bellies get full, they get gassy, and then that gas gets expelled, and that's where we get the lift and the bloom from that.
So with the intent of doing it as fast or as efficiently as possible, the first bloom, I always push it anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes.
Okay.
So that way I know it's fully activated, I can get everything in, and then all of the gases that are trapped and all of the activation and rising that's going to happen is going to happen in dough form. That will sit for another 30 minutes or so, depending on the ambient temperature of the room, the humidity. If you have a proofer at home, most people wouldn't have a proofer, but what you can do is you can use an oven put a little bit of heat in the oven and maybe a shallow pan of hot water to create a little bit of steam. And what you've done is built yourself a proofer at home.
Absolutely.
And that will rapidly reduce the amount of time that you need for it to rest.
Perfect. Yeah, and most ovens, what they do is they have that setting where it's a keep warm setting.
Yes.
So you hit that, and that's what we did here today. If you don't have that, I always, and like my grandmother used to say, is find a nice sunny spot on your kitchen table.
Yep.
And put the cloth over top and let it do its thing. So
That'll work. All right, so I'm going to turn this on. We're going to have a little bit of volume here, but we're going to start mixing all of this.
perfect.
dough
And
now.
how long do you want to knead it for?
Depending on your machine, you want to go low and slow for about 2 minutes.
Okay.
And then I would crank it up to about medium for another 30 seconds to a minute. And then you'll want to dust your workspace and then do a little bit more hand kneading, turn it into a ball, put it into a bowl, and set it off to the side.
So texture-wise, like I tell everyone else, is soft like your earlobe. That kind of feel to it, kind of bounces back.
Yeah,
that type of feel.
there are a lot of I don't want to call them old wives' tales, but
Yeah.
there's a lot of tried and true. There's the window pane method. So if you want to take a small bit of that dough and just stretch it between your hands, and if you can pull it apart and you can see through that dough, then you've got proper gluten production. A visual, which hopefully we can get to here, is that when you're mixing and all of the dough has come apart from the bowl, there's
Clean
nothing
bowl.
left.
Absolutely, yeah.
Nothing left. That means you've got a perfect fat to dry ratio. And that's when we see that, especially in the bigger batches,
Nice,
it's
yeah.
just it's perfect. So we know that we've worked it. All right, ready?
Ready.
All right. Oh, that's not so bad. Okay. So any sort of mixer that you're going to use, you need to make sure you have a dough hook. Anything else, and you're gonna ruin it, basically.
But you can definitely do this by hand, can you?
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely.
You can do it by hand. It just takes a little bit longer, and it gets you some nice forearm muscles. So what I've done here is I've done in the bake shop. This would be considered a half a batch. So
Okay.
this would give us exactly enough to make one tray of cinnamon rolls.
And one tray of cinnamon rolls is what, about a dozen?
No, we get 15.
Oh, wow,
We get
okay.
15. So it's
A true baker's dozen.
yeah. Okay, so a little tacky here, which is fine.
And again, it's a little tacky, but I mean, it's super humid in here today, so.
It is, and it's okay if you find that it's tacky. All you would need to do is just add a little bit more flour to it. And if you have a dough scraper, which is a plastic, semi-malleable, semi-stiff plastic utensil that you can use it to scrape down the sides of the bowl, and you can get all of that extra dough that's sort of hanging out, and you can pull it all back and incorporate it back into the main bowl.
And again, you don't need fancy tools. Chef Simon just used the spatula. So whatever you have on hand.
Yep. Use a fork
Yep.
if you need to.
What's the difference between a cinnamon roll and a cinnamon bun? I guess is what a lot of people might want to know.
I think that's more just vernacular.
Okay.
Yeah, but if we're going yeast dough versus biscuit dough, so yeast dough is going to be very fluffy, very light, very airy. The biscuit dough is going to be a little bit more dense, a little crispy, a little crunchy. And I know people that are adamant on either side of that fence. They want their biscuit dough, or they have to have the yeast dough. So the biscuit dough, in order to avoid having that tasty brick, there's a method called lamination. So it's very similar to like croissant or puff pastry, where you keep folding your layers. You're not mixing like you have here. You're just folding.
Yep.
You're just folding, rolling it out, folding again. And that way, once it bakes,
It'll
all
give
the
that nice
layers,
striation, yeah.
all the layers expand. So I'm gonna have to get a little bit of extra flour in here, but then I'm gonna continue mixing it. Thank you very much.
Now, if you didn't have a scale, can you rough out an estimate, weight-wise, teaspoon-wise, for the people at home to want to give it a crack but don't have a scale?
So if you're going to be making this at home with just your measuring cups and measuring spoons, it's a pretty easy, simple conversion. Again, you're going to start with your yeast activation. So you're going to want a tablespoon of sugar. You're going to want a tablespoon of yeast, which is approximately one of those little packets.
Okay.
And then you're going to need 1.5 cups of water. And then you're going to mix that hot water, tap hot. So you don't want boiling. Boiling will kill the yeast. Cold water will work. It'll just take much longer.
Like you were saying, that whole activation time thing. So yeah.
Yeah. So once that's going, you want to get your other ingredients together. So you'll want about 1/8 of a cup of oil. You'll want a teaspoon of salt, and then you'll need about 1.5 cups to 2 cups of flour. And then that's it. And then your brown sugar, your cinnamon, and your margarine, that's done at the end. Once you roll everything out, you can just do it by hand. It's okay, you can go ahead and get dirty. And then sprinkle your brown sugar, sprinkle your cinnamon, roll it up, chop it, and you're good to go.
Welcome back to Easy Eats with Chef Yves. Again, I'm in the Learning Kitchen here at the Greener Village with pastry chef Simon Duvall, and he's just about to finish his cinnamon rolls. So you're just rolling these out now, and then we're going to get it all painted up and seasoned and flavored. Let's just talk about cinnamon for a second. It's kind of a neat spice. It's actually the bark of a tree, which a lot of other things are berries or nuts or things like that, but it's just really interesting that that cinnamon, and why cinnamon rolls. I mean, you could flavor it with all kinds of other things.
We do actually flavor it with all different kinds of things, but the cinnamon is what everybody knows and what everybody's familiar with, and it's definitely one of those products or ingredients that has been, tried and tested, and it's in, the public mind, and everybody knows it and everybody loves it.
And then cinnamon has all kinds of great uses too. I mean, it's a spice from India or from Africa that people died over, I guess, trading and things like that. And it's great for curing all kinds of things too. It's great for curing meats. It's great for pastries. It's an all-around good used spice.
Another unknown, or I guess less known quality with cinnamon is that it really enhances other flavors as well,
Yep.
specifically chocolate. So when we have some of our chocolate frosting, we put a tiny little bit of cinnamon in it from time to time, and that just really enhances that chocolate flavor. So it's a lot stronger than it would normally be.
So there's a great tip to know. So when you're making your hot chocolate next time, or a little ganache, sprinkle a little cinnamon in
A
there.
little bit of cinnamon, and that should work.
So when you're rolling out your dough, chef, how thick do you make it?
Thickness is, I don't want to say variable, but depending on the size of what you're doing, like if you want really thick, really fluffy cinnamon buns, then you can go thicker than you'd like. But for us, for our purposes here today, we want to make sure that we have, about half of my pinky finger is generally where we'd like to go. Half of that is all you need.
Yeah, a little, 3/4 of an inch or so.
Yeah, because we roll it so much, there's a lot of dough that goes into each cinnamon bun. So what you're looking to have is a nice rectangle, which is about 2.5 feet wide by maybe 13 to 15 inches tall.
Okay.
And when you're rolling,
So it's the size of a large cookie sheet, essentially, right?
yeah, that's
Okay.
actually a really good way to describe it. So when we're rolling, I always like to flip it and turn it 90 degrees, so you're not always rolling in the same direction, so that way you can spread it out evenly and equally.
Again, if it's not perfectly square, it's not going to ruin your cinnamon
Absolutely
rolls at
not.
all.
Absolutely not. And when you get to the point where you think it's ready, you can even just manipulate it by hand and you can pull it. As long as you've allowed it to rest the appropriate amount, it will allow itself to be shaped by hand as well. So this is a decent start, and we can go from here and we can show our viewers how we dress it.
Perfect. And I know, so you're using margarine because it is a vegan application, but if you wanted to use
Yes.
butter, then you definitely, I know that's how we make them at home. We like our butter.
Yeah.
So, but you can definitely use margarine or any other kind of soy or any kind of vegan product that you'd like in there, right?
Any sort of spread that will allow the cinnamon and the sugar to adhere to the dough will work. At this point,
I'll get those out of the way for you. There we go.
I'm gonna go one last roll. And when you're rolling, before you apply anything, you wanna make sure that you separate it from the table just so that it will reveal its true shape. Because if you roll it out and it gets stuck to the table, it will condense a bunch.
Not only that, it won't stick to the table when you're trying to roll it up, so you get a nice even product instead of a kind of a wiggly, uneven worm.
So this is the fun part. Just like that. Best practice is to start at the center and work your way out so you're not pulling the dough towards you.
Now I've seen other chefs or other pastry chefs make a paste with the sugar and the cinnamon and the margarine and then spread it on.
Yeah.
I prefer this method. It's a little bit more fun. It allows you to kind of regulate the amount of cinnamon that you're putting in.
So that method does work, and that's a very good point. You do have a little bit more control this way. You just want to make sure you spread it evenly across.
Now, Chef, if you don't have brown sugar, what can you do to substitute other than just using plain old white sugar?
You can, if you have molasses at home, you can take white sugar and molasses and mix that together. That will give you a good facsimile of brown sugar. If you don't have brown sugar, you can use maple syrup. Maple syrup also works a little bit. That might counteract a little bit of the cinnamon flavor, but it will give you definitely a nice tasty bun. So now that we're here, we've got everything together. We're gonna go for the nice shape. I like to do a big fold right away and then go small
and do
after
the small
that.
pinch. Okay.
So that way, whenever you see your cinnamon bun, you're gonna have that nice big centerpiece right in it.
The favorite part, I guess. Is
The part that people fight over.
While you do that, I'm going to get a pan ready here with some parchment, and we'll do that, and then we'll get it ready for the proofer or the windowsill or the kitchen table in the sun. And I'm going to show you what it looks like after it's been proved. Here we go. Got a lovely product right here. So you're going to notice once Chef puts those in the pan, we'll show you the difference between both. And then I'll slide this into an oven. How hot of an oven are we going to slide these into, Chef?
We are aiming for 350. I wouldn't go any higher than 375 just because we don't want the sugars to caramelize and burn too much.
Gotcha. So there you go. You notice the difference between the ones that he's putting in the pan and the ones that we have now. So these have pretty much tripled or even quadrupled in size. So you kind of want the whole bun to fill the pan.
You want essentially no gaps between any of the cinnamon buns. That's the best way to gauge it.
Perfect. So I'm going to slide these in an oven, 350 for how long, Chef?
Approximately 17 minutes.
All right, folks. So they've been in for about 15 to 20 minutes, give or take, and this is what you get, a lovely cinnamon rolls right here. My last question to you is, how many of these have you served so far?
Well, September 4th will be 2 years in business, and as of last Friday, we've had just about 30,000 cinnamon buns made and sold out of the bake shop.
Well, that's fantastic. So are you tired of making them?
Not at all. I love them.